Alright, so today I want to show you some genes or combinations of genes that can completely mask the spider ball python. And the spider is kind of a tricky gene. It's actually one of the most impressive standalone genes, really visually stunning, and when you mix it in with other combinations, it can make some of the most breathtaking combinations. But the problem with the spider is if you actually take the spider and you breed it to another spider, 25% of the time you'll get the super spider, which is a lethal combination. And I've actually seen a lot of people picking up pet snakes or snakes that are listed as fancy ball pythons. You don't really know the genes in there, and a couple of years down the road you get that snake and you kind of grow it up and you're starting to think, hey, maybe I should breed my ball python. And I'd say if you actually have spider in your ball python, whether you know it or not, I'd say most of the times you can pick out the spider. The spider is a real visually dominant gene that really breaks through most of the other genes. But believe it or not, there's actually a few genes that'll completely mask the spider. There's actually one that'll completely eliminate it, where you can't tell the spider is in the mix at all, which is pretty crazy. And there's also combinations of genes where you can potentially have spider in the mix and you definitely wouldn't know it. So today I want to jump over the internet and I want to show you some of these genes and combinations of genes that can completely mask the spider ball python. Alright, so I'm going to jump over here on Morphmarket.com and I want to start with this snake right here. This is the spider ball python. And let me tell you, the spider is one of the most visually stunning genes just by itself and when you mix it with a lot of combinations. And when I first started in ball pythons about 5 years ago, I was really drawn to the spider because it was a really visually stunning gene. And the problem is I didn't really know genetics when I started. And I definitely didn't know that you'd have a problem breeding two spiders together. So technically, I suppose you could breed two spiders together, but the thing you have to keep in mind is 25% of the egg, 1 out of 4 eggs, you'll actually end up with a super spider, which is a lethal combination. And I've seen some people produce super spiders and they say the embryos will actually develop inside of the egg, and before the snake hatches, for whatever reason, they'll pass away and die inside of the egg. I've actually seen some people cutting open eggs and showing what a super spider looks like. So I'd probably definitely stay away from breeding two spiders together. So this is what the spider looks like, and essentially if you're brand new into ball pythons, you're kind of figuring out, all right, what are the genes in my ball pythons? I'd say the spider is one of the easiest ones to figure out if you actually have it in your combination. And the spider gets its name from kind of this spider web pattern coming down the back of the ball python, and usually the spider will have a really crazy pattern on the top of the head. That's usually a really good indication. There's a few other genes like the spot nose that have really strong patterns, but let me tell you, if you have a spider in combinations, usually you have a really crazy head stamp on top of the ball python. And a lot of times with the spiders, you actually have some white coming up the sides of the snake, and sometimes it can be a lot of white coming up about 50% of the way up the snake, and sometimes I've actually seen some spiders with no white at all, and the white almost looks like calico, which is kind of interesting. I've seen some people, as a matter of fact, a lot of people have asked me under my videos, they're like, hey, how do I make a spider? What genes come together to make the spider? And the spider is just one gene. So if you actually took a spider, you bred it to something else, half the offspring would come out as spiders or spider combinations. So it's kind of interesting looking at this snake. It looks like maybe there's Enchi that reduces the gene. Maybe there's calico to bring up the white. Maybe there's spot nose because of this crazy pattern on the head, and it's just one single gene. So I actually wanted to show you probably the number one thing you've actually heard about before if you've been into ball pythons for a while, and that is the blackhead. This is what the blackhead looks like, and you get a really interesting effect when you mix the blackhead with the spider. And when it comes to dark morphs, I'd say the blackhead is pretty much the darkest of the dark. You mix almost anything with the blackhead and you get a really dark background. I've actually seen it break through even some, for example, you can actually put the blackhead into pinstripe, which is a really visually dominant gene, and the blackhead will even darken the pinstripe, which is pretty amazing. And here's what happens if you take the blackhead and you work it into a spider, you get the blackhead spider. And at first glance, you're probably thinking, hey, this looks pretty much like a normal ball python. And kind of the weird thing about the blackhead spider is the blackhead spider combination pretty much wipes out not only the spider, but also the blackhead blackhead, and you're left with a snake that looks almost completely normal, and it's pretty amazing. It's actually an allele combination. So if you took the blackhead spider, this normal looking snake, and you bred it to something else, half the offspring would come out as spiders and half would come out as blackhead. So a lot of people can actually have a snake like this and they wouldn't actually know they have a blackhead spider. And I don't know how you'd actually figure out that you had a blackhead spider, other than you'd probably pay a lot more than a normal ball python. And a lot of times if you're actually buying it like at a reptile show or something like that, the breeder can tell you the genes in the combination. So here's another one that's pretty interesting when you mix it with the spider, and that is the cypress. I actually did a video on just the cypress itself with a whole bunch of combinations. The cypress is kind of an interesting gene. When I first started in ball pythons, just the cypress by itself were selling for thousands of dollars. I thought it had a lot of potential, but it was way out of my price range. And here, just 5 years later, you can pick them up for just a few $100s, which is pretty amazing. And the cypress really brightens the snake, really brings out a lot of the brighter colors. A lot of times the cypress will actually give you some highlighting around the alien heads. You see kind of some of this light color coming around the pattern on the side of the snake. And a lot of times you'll actually know you have a cypress too, because it'll actually have kind of a light band right on the back of the head. And let me tell you, the cypress, when you mix it in with some combinations, you can make some really stunning combinations. And here's what happens if you take the cypress and you work it into the spider. Take a look at this. I'd say if someone had to be the snake, I would not know what the genes were, and I would not guess at all that there was spider in this combination. You can kind of see this weird pattern on the side. It almost looks kind of like a Mojave or something, kind of with these like floating patterns. It doesn't really look like the spider pattern. And if you actually take a look at the head, there's a little bit of pattern on the head, but I'd say it's not really a giveaway that there's spider in this combination. And usually with your cypress combinations, you'll have this really strong line down the back of a lot of your cypress combinations. And usually it's not a really straight line. It's kind of like this jiggly line that comes down the top of the snake. It's kind of an interesting effect, working the cypress in with the spider. So here's another one. This is the freeway, and the freeway is actually an allelic combination. That's a combination of the asphalt and the yellow belly. The freeway is essentially the same thing as the highways. So the highways and freeways are both allelic combinations with yellow belly. The only difference between the two is the freeway contains the asphalt, the highways contain the gravel, and both of them interact in really kind of an interesting effect when you mix spider in with the freeway. So here's what happens if you take spider and work it into a freeway. Take a look at this. It completely wipes out the spider pattern on the freeway. And I'd say most people, if they're actually buying a pet snake, they probably won't buy a spider freeway because it's a pretty expensive combination. I haven't even looked at the price, but I bet this is pretty expensive. This one actually sold for $1,000. Of course, this was back in 2018. I can probably almost guarantee that these are pretty close to $1,000. I haven't even checked on the recent prices on some of these freeways. Kind of the difficult part of the freeway is you take a freeway, you breed it to something else, and all the offspring look like normals. You can actually pick out the difference between a yellow belly, an asphalt, and a normal. There's just a little tiny markers on the snake. Sometimes you can actually see some pixelation along the belly of the snake, and sometimes it's kind of hard to figure out if you have an asphalt or a yellow belly or a normal. And kind of I'd say the difficult part of this project is the asphalt and the yellow belly look pretty much identical, and you can't tell them apart. And that's I think, let me tell you, you can probably make some of the most amazing combinations with the freeways. But one of the things that really kept me out of it is if you actually breed this to something else, you don't know if you have asphalt or yellow belly in your offspring. You have a 50-50 chance because it's an allelic complex. And it's kind of interesting when you work spider in here. I'd say if I actually picked up the snake, say I was buying a really high-end pet and I picked up a spider freeway, I had $1,000 to throw around. I actually picked up the snake, and a couple of years later I wanted to breed it, and I wanted to figure out if there was spider in it. Now, just by looking at the appearance of the snake, it'd be really difficult to pick out the spider because you completely lose all of the spider pattern, which is a pretty interesting effect in this combination. So here's another one that's pretty interesting too. This is actually the Disco Inferno. So the Disco Inferno consists of two jeans, the Disco and the Fire. And this one is, it's an allelic complex too, and it's a little bit difficult too, because if you actually take the Disco Inferno, you breed it to something else, all the offspring pretty much look the same. And half of them are Discos, half of them are Fires. And Fires and Discos look like, kind of like a creamy colored normal. A lot of times you can actually see kind of like a head stamp on some of your Fires and Discos, but a lot of times you can't tell the difference between the Disco and the Fire. And here's the interesting thing, when you actually work Spider into the Disco Inferno, take a look at this, you get kind of the similar effect as the freeways and the highways, where it really jumbles up the pattern and you completely lose the effect of the Spider gene in the combination. As a matter of fact, if someone actually gave me this and said, hey, what do you think this is? I'd say that looks like a Disco Inferno. And a lot of times the Disco Infernos will have these kind of these white patches coming up. It's just kind of a random anomaly in your Disco Inferno. Some of them won't have much white. Some of them will almost have like a pied look to them, and that's just part of the combination. A lot of times, unless you're really familiar with the Disco Infernos, I don't know if you could actually pick out the Spider in this combination. So here's another one you're probably familiar with, and that is the all-white snake with blue eyes. That is the blue-eyed leucistic. And I actually did a video on how to make an all-white snake. There's like over 40 ways to make an all-white snake. There's a whole bunch of genes in the blue-eyed leucistic. As a matter of fact, the snake that's around my neck at the beginning and the end of the video, that is Bobby, my bamboo ball python, and he is in the blue-eyed leucistic. So if you took two bamboos and bred them together, 25% of the time you'd end up with an all-white snake with blue eyes like this one. And the problem is, especially with some of these, so for example, this is actually, I'm pretty sure this was a lesser Mojave. So when you mix the lesser and the Mojave, you get one of the starkest white blue-eyed leucistics that completely covers up all the other genes in the combination. So this one is listed as a blue-eyed leucistic plus because it can have a whole bunch of other genes in there and you can't see them because of the white snake. So this could potentially have the Spider, the leopard, and the pastel in this blue-eyed leucistic. Completely would cover up any indication of Spider. And sometimes you can tell if there's Spider in the mix if it has a slight head wobble. So in some spiders you actually have a slight, kind of like a neurological defect where they'll have just kind of a little, they kind of position their head at a weird angle sometimes. And I actually produced some spiders here in my collection, and none of the spiders that I've ever produced had any kind of a neurological issues or head wobbles or anything. But I've actually seen some where you can pick up a white snake and it kind of moves its head in kind of a weird way, and if you have possible Spider in there with the addition of kind of that weird head movement, sometimes you can pick out that it does have Spider in the mix. So here's a couple more I wanted to show you at the end where it completely masks all the other genes. So this one is potentially possible Spider in something like this. So this is actually a silver bullet. So the silver bullet, well, this is a silver bullet blast super cinnamon pastel pinstripe. So it's kind of interesting with a lot of the combinations with the cinnamon and the pastel, especially when you make the super cinnamon. So the super cinnamons can be a completely black snake or kind of like a really dark brown snake. And when you work pastel into the super cinnamon, sometimes you can lighten it, but it's really a visually dominant combination. So if you actually work Spider into a combination like this, it would completely mask all the genes in here. As a matter of fact, the pinstripe is also possibly in here, and the pinstripe is, I'd say it's probably even more visually dominant than the Spider. Usually when you work pinstripe into combinations, it breaks through where you can see the pinstripe in there, and then this one, you can't see the pinstripe or the Spider, although it could possibly be in the combination. And I actually pulled one more up over here. It's kind of a similar combination. This is actually the 8-ball. So the 8-ball is the combination of the cinnamon and the black pastel. And a lot of the 8-balls can be almost jet black, like a completely patternless black snake. And some of them can be a little bit browner. But let me tell you, they are so visually dominant that when you work other genes into an 8-ball, a lot of times they can completely disappear in the background. So this one's actually a pastel 8-ball, possible spider, possible yellow belly. There is possibly spider in here, and it completely masks the spider ball python. So if you actually had one of these snakes and you're kind of wondering if you have a spider in your combination, I'd say you could probably look through this list. This is probably all the combinations that I can think of that would completely masks the spider ball python. So you definitely don't want to breed the spider to another spider, and you definitely don't want to breed a spider to a champagne, because that is another lethal combination. All right, so it is time for the question of the day. And James Frederick asks, can you have two visual albinos in a single ball python? For example, an albino with a lavender albino or a toffee? And that is a very good question. So keep in mind the albinos, pretty much all of them are recessive genes. So you need 2 copies of the gene for a visual. And for a double visual, you'd actually need 2 copies of each type of gene. And it really comes down to whether the genes are compatible or not. And sometimes they can be compatible and sometimes they're not. So for example, if you actually took an albino and you bred it to a toffee, all the offspring would come out with 1 copy of the albino and 1 copy of the toffee gene. It'd be het for toffee, het for albino, and that's actually a visual. It actually looks like a visual albino. They actually call that a toffino. So in that case, you couldn't have a double visual, because they pretty much act like the same gene, but they just have a different visual appearance as far as the visual appearance of the snake. But kind of on the flip side, if you actually took the albino and bred it to a lavender albino, technically you could produce a double visual. As a matter of fact, I actually went over to morphmarket.com and I saw some listed as double visuals, albino, lavender albinos over there. I don't know if it was a typo or not, but it's kind of the interesting thing is looking at the visual, if that's actually correct, it looked pretty much like a regular albino ball python. So I don't know if it's a good project to chase after. It might be kind of interesting to try it once. I don't know if I keep chasing after it, because especially if you have a double visual that looks like just a regular albino, sometimes you wouldn't know for sure 100% if you actually hit the double visual. And kind of on the flip side to that too, you can actually take a lavender albino and breed it to a toffee. I actually found some over on Morphmarket that were double het for toffee and lavender albinos. As a matter of fact, toffee is pretty much the same name as the candy. I found some het for candy, het for lavender albinos, but I didn't find any double visuals for those. That'd be kind of an interesting project. So that is pretty much it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.